And we are here in the kitchen with Julia Fitchett and sommelier Craig Kleeman from the kitchen at Powhatan. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. Instead of our usual just cooking in the kitchen, we're actually going to talk about wine and food pairings today. So, first of all, we're going to start with a salad. Why don't we talk about the ingredients and what kind of salad we're making?
Well, we got some nice organic greens from the market, and we're going to toss that with a little white balsamic vinaigrette and a little cucumber, tomato, dill salad that's also been marinated in the balsamic vinaigrette. And Craig is going to talk to us about pairing wine with this particular dish.
So what will we be doing here for the preparation? Just kind of slicing the cucumbers, tomatoes, and onions, and just...
Correct. It's just sliced cucumbers, tomatoes, onions, a little bit of dill, a little bit of salt.
So something really light for the springtime.
Correct.
Kind of start things off. Now, why don't you talk to us about the wine you selected for this particular dish?
For wine and food pairing, you can usually go one of two ways. You can look to complement all the flavors at play in a dish, or you can look to contrast them. It can get complicated, though, when you have a really complex flavor profile like that, because we've got some frisée in here that's going to have a fair amount of bitterness, same with the radicchio. Cucumber's pretty neutral. You've got some acidity at play with the tomatoes, but especially with the balsamic, you've got a fair amount of acidity there and some sweetness that you can pick plenty of different white wines that you would completely lose. For a long time, the rule for pairing wines with salad courses was that if you're going with something with like a citrus vinaigrette or balsamic, don't pair wine because it's just going to get completely knocked out. What you can do, though, with more acidic dressings like that is match them with a more acidic wine. So the one that I have here is from Austria. This is a grape called Grüner Veltliner, which is planted with about a third of the Austrian vineyards have this right now. Grüner Veltliner is one of my favorite white grape varieties because you don't see it all over the place. It's got a lot of natural acidity on its own, and so with a dish like this, it's going to be able to kind of hold its own, and you're going to still be able to taste the wine, even though there's so much acidity and different flavors at play in the dish. So it's going to hopefully stand out, even though you've got a pretty strongly flavored salad.
So I know you were saying that sometimes with the wines, you try to find something to either complement or contrast this. Right. Which would you say then that this is doing to this particular dish?
This is going to be more complementary because you've got acid in the salad and you've got a fair amount of acidity in the wine. A contrast would be more if you had like a spicy Asian noodle dish and you could pick a kind of fairly sweet, not quite dessert wine, but a sweeter table wine like a German Riesling or Gewürztraminer, and that's going to be a nice contrast between the heat of the dish, both on the temperature side and the coldness of the wine, and then also the spiciness of the dish versus the sweetness of the wine. So when you put the two together, it makes everything really pop out.
All right, and as we were talking, I heard you whisking some things together.
What were you whisking? A little extra vinaigrette for the greens, so white balsamic vinegar, olive oil, sugar, and some salt.
Okay, and what are the measurements there? Just kind of a pinch here and there for folks?
Yeah, just the flavor. Some people like more vinegar, some people like it a little sweeter. So,
so we just have this mixed here, and we have the cucumber, tomato, and onions there.
Correct. And
go ahead,
plate it up.
Okay, just kind of plate it up there.
Yeah, and it's pretty simple here.
Okay, very colorful. It all looks perfect for the kind of weather it looks like we're coming into now with the warmer temperature, so it looks great. While you do that, we will check in with Cheryl and Cerise for the weather. When we come back, much more to talk about when it comes to food and wine pairings. Hey, ladies. Here in the kitchen with Julia Fitchett and sommelier Craig Kleeman from the kitchen at Powhatan. And again, today we're doing something a little different here in the kitchen. We're doing a lot of talking about wine pairings with food. So what we're going to do is right now talk about the wine when it comes to the salads. We're going to pour ourselves a little glass of wine here and just chat more about how to choose the right wine for your food.
And picking the right wine is not always there is one perfect wine for a given dish. There can be a lot of different options that'll work for different reasons. A lot of the time for people at home, it's not, I'm going to cook this meal and now I'm going to go to the wine shop to find that perfect pairing. Instead, it can often be, let me find what the best option is that I happen to have on hand. And so having versatile food-friendly wines on hand is really a great idea. We talked a little bit earlier about complementing versus contrasting. Those are the two major roads you can go down. The other thing is to keep in mind body with body. Here we've got a dish that's very, very light. If you were to do a big, heavy, high-alcohol red wine with this, the flavors wouldn't really match up for one, but also in terms of just the weight and the mouthfeel, you would totally overpower and overshadow the dish with the texture and the mouthfeel and the body of the wine that you've got. So instead, this Gruner Veltliner is going to have almost always, you're never going to see any oak aging on these. You're going to have a much lighter wine. Again, it's high acid, which acidity is always going to be your friend, especially with difficult food pairings. Strength with strength, complexity with complexity. This again goes to the complement versus contrast. If you have a really complicated dish with a lot of different layers of flavors, you can try to pick a wine that's going to match up all those flavors in different ways, or you can accept that that's a really difficult challenge and instead have a complex dish with a very simple wine and let the food kind of be the star in that particular course, or you can go the opposite.
Now, what are some, I know there's some common misconceptions out there. Some folks say you can only pair red wine or should only pair red wine with steak or, you know, that sort of thing.
Those are easy because they're nice little bumper stickers and they're easy to remember. It's not always necessary, but by the same token, if somebody is at our restaurant and is getting our New York strip and wants me to suggest a wine, I can't remember the last time that I suggested that they get a white. If it's an allergy thing, in that instance, I'll pick the biggest, fullest-bodied, oakiest white that I can find, but it's not going to be as good as most of the reds on the wine list.
Now, very quickly, I know we just have a little bit of time left in this segment, but we want to talk about going green. You had mentioned that you could chat about that with some wine.
Now, there's been a lot made about screw tops versus cork in the last few years. Pretty much the only thing left that True Cork has going for it is that if you throw this in a landfill, it will be there for the next 1,500 years. If you throw a cork in, it's a renewable resource and it's completely compostable. I take our corks home from the restaurant, chop them up and throw them in my compost, so that way they end up in my garden and do very well. I'm also making Julia save all the scraps from our salads today so I can take them home and compost them. Other thing is, if you've got a bottle, this, if you stick it in the fridge, if you don't finish it today, is going to pretty much be spoiled in about 3 days, even at refrigerator temperature. If it was sweeter, you'd have a couple days on top of that. But if it's not good for drinking anymore, it is still totally fine to cook with. You can deglaze pans with it. You can use it for sauces. If you want to get a little more cutting edge, you can work on making your own wine vinegar, which is something we do. It's going to take you a fair amount of time. It can end very badly, but it's much better than just dumping it down the drain. So you have a lot of options there.
You can reuse that. Okay, more reusing as we're talking. I'm going to And we are back in the kitchen with Julia Fitchett and sommelier Craig Kleeman from the kitchen at Powhatan. Today, of course, we're wrapping up talking about our wine and food pairing, and Julia's been pretty quiet today. She's been working, chopping everything, getting it all ready, but that's right, and it looks lovely. It smells delicious, too. Why don't we chat again about the final wine pairing here with all of these different dishes?
So on our cheese tray here, we've got 4 different kinds of cheese. Underneath on this side is a fresh mozzarella. This is a smoked mozzarella. A lot of people recognize the brie, and this is a aged smoked cheddar. The strawberries are just to look pretty, but with just on the cheese side, we've got a huge variance in flavors and textures. We've got the very, very creamy brie. It's also not going to have a lot of saltiness, neither is the fresh mozz. The smoked cheddar, though, is going to be much saltier, much firmer. This is one of the situations where if you try to pick a wine that's going to match everything, you're not going to have any success. So that brings out kind of one of my standbys. This is a Vinho Verde. It's from northern Portugal. It means green wine, but the wine itself is not green. It means it's meant to be drunk nice and young. Vinho Verde, very light, very fresh tasting. It's also got a little bit of effervescence, you can see. And that, on the texture side, is going to be your saving grace on difficult pairings like this. Because with a lot of still wines, if you have the brie, all that creaminess is just going to coat your palate, and you're not going to taste the wine that you have with it. Instead, once you've got something with a little bit of bubbly here, you're going to find it's going to break up that texture. You'll be able to taste the next bite just as well. Vinho Verde, to me, is kind of the wine version of lemonade. Very light, very refreshing, high acid. It's also about 9% alcohol, so you can drink it while it's hot out, and it's not going to be nearly as affecting as some others.
To know,
and as far as our starches here, this is just a baguette that's been sliced up and toasted with a little bit of olive oil and salt. The secret to making it taste good is that it's not as healthy for you. And then we've got a flatbread with some cheese and tomato. So we've got all kinds of flavors going here, but you've got a simple wine that's not going to try to compete, and the bubbles are really going to help with the texture there. Also, retail, you're very rarely going to see Vinho Verdes for over about $12.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much. We learned some great tips today when it comes to the wine and food pairing. Let's check in now with Cheryl.